Anton Chekhov wrote, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass." This is the quintessential sentence used by writers and teachers everywhere to show or demonstrate the difference between showing and telling. If I walk into my daughter's next sleepover and I say, "I'm a cool mom," I have just lost all credibility and relegated myself to the long list of not cool moms. Telling someone that you're cool or strong or smart doesn't hold much weight because if you have to say it out loud, it is probably not true. Story is about revealing character, and we do that through actions. We don't say, "My character is a badass." For instance, Jason Bourne never once says, "I'm a badass." But the first time he kills someone, we get the picture. No one in the book or the movie needs to say those words out loud. Wow, he's such a badass. The action in the story tells us what we need to know. The same is true of your characters and your stories. Telling the readers takes away their power. Fiction writers and teachers use that phrase that you've heard hundreds or maybe thousands of times, show don't tell. I would say it depends on the genre, and it also depends on what kind of mix you're looking for. There's a mix of show, don't tell. Philip Lowpay, who is a creative nonfiction writer and a creative writing teacher, wrote the book To Show and to Tell because he believes that there's a mix between showing and telling, that it can't be all showing. Here's a for instance. Sometimes it depends on genre. So literary fiction is very firmly planted in the action and dialogue only. No internal thoughts and absolutely no telling. If Lois is a messy person, the reader must surmise it from the observations of the narrator, but not the thoughts. No telling unless you want to go to literary jail. Fantasy is very heavy on showing because people want to see the cool, special world that the fantasy author is creating. Detective fiction, however, is very light on description, just the facts. So if there's going to be description in there, the reader of detective fiction thinks there's a reason for it. Chekhov, our friend from the first slide, said, "If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired." The movie Knives Out that came out last year was very much kind of set. I kept seeing this thing of knives on the wall, thinking somehow, some way, this is going to come up in the plot because it's very much like Chekhov's gun. There's nothing wasted in detective fiction, and mystery readers in particular are reading the details looking for clues, so anything you use must come up later. Here are some examples of showing and telling. Telling would be, Lois was a horribly messy person, and you can see that was indicates that it's passive, and therefore it can use some help being turned into something more showing rather than telling. Showing would be, "Hey, there's my sandwich," Lois exclaimed triumphantly, spying yesterday's meatball sub protruding from the heap of dirty laundry on the back seat of her car. Obviously, we know she's a messy person. But what if Lois was compulsively neat? Think about how you would show that. What does a compulsively neat person do? I know someone who organizes her kitchen cabinets in perfect rows, measuring the exact space between the items with a ruler. What situations bring out a person's compulsive neatness? Guess of a Nation does this balance of back and forth between showing and telling. And it starts out with showing, and I'm going to read so that you can see what the showing looks like. At dusk, the big Englishman Belcher would shift his long legs out of the ashes and ask, "Well, chums, what about it?" And nobler me would say, "As you please, chum," for we had picked up some of their curious expressions, and the little Englishman Hawkins would light the lamp and produce the cards. That whole thing is showing. We see the big Englishman put his legs closer to the fire. Sometimes, the story continues, Jeremiah Donovan would come of an evening and supervise the play and grow excited over Hawkins' cards, which he always played badly, and shout at him as if he were one of our own. All of that is telling. "Ach, you devil you! Why didn't you play the tray?" That's switch back to showing. But ordinarily, Jeremiah was a sober and contented poor devil like the big Englishman Belcher, and was looked up to at all only because he was a fair hand at documents, though slow enough at these, I vow. All of that was telling. The story continues to show. Donovan wore a small cloth hat and his big gaiters over his long pants, and seldom did I perceive his hands outside the pockets of the pants. He reddened when you talked to him, tilting from toe to heel and back and looking down all the while at his big farmer's feet. His uncommon broad accent was a great source of jest to me, I being from the town, as you may recognize. So you see that balance, that back and forth between active description, active showing, and then telling. And most fiction is this back and forth. It just depends on your style and the genre for how much of this back and forth there is. Let's look at some other examples. We're going to look at two authors, two different styles, and see if you can see where they show and where they tell. This is from Stephen King. This is the way The Stand starts. That was a little bit appropriate for our current time. Sally, a low mutter. Wake up now, Sally. A louder mutter. Leave me alone. He shook her harder. Wake up. You gotta wake up. Charlie's voice, calling her. For how long? Sally swam up out of sleep. First, she glanced at the clock on the nightstand and saw it was 2:15 in the morning. Charlie shouldn't even be here. He should be on shift. Then she got her first good look at him, and something leaped up inside her, some deadly intuition. Her husband was deathly pale. His eyes started and bulged from their sockets. The car keys were in one hand. He was still using the other to shake her, although her eyes were open. It was as if he hadn't been able to register the fact that she was awake. Charlie, what is it? What's wrong? So before we even get to that last question, which is telling, we know something's not right. We're waking somebody up out of sleep, and then instead of saying she woke up or she's awake or she was sleeping but now she's awake, she swam up out of sleep, and we hear that voice kind of slowly becoming aware of the situation that she's going through. So this is a very active showing scene. Now the next one comes from James Patterson, and his writing style is very different. It is an unusually warm night in July, but I'm shivering badly as I stand on the substantial gray stone terrace outside my apartment. I'm looking out over glorious San Francisco, and I have my service revolver pressed against the side of my temple. So there's a mix of show and tell here, because you see they're telling you that it's glorious San Francisco. They're not showing that, and yet the character, the narrator, has her service revolver pressed against the side of her temple. God damn you, God, I whisper. Quite a sentiment, but appropriate and just, I think. I hear sweet Martha whimpering. I turn and see she is watching me through the glass doors that lead to the terrace. She knows that something is wrong. It's okay, I call to her through the door. I'm okay. Go lie down, girl. Martha won't leave, though, won't look away. She's a good, loyal friend who's been nuzzling me good night every single night for the past 6 years. We have very little sense for what's happening in the outside world, but we know very much what's happening inside this main characters. And there's a balance in both of those that I gave you. There's a balance of showing and telling. The percentage is really made up of genre and writer. So when I say show, don't tell, I'm really saying there are times that showing is vital and the opening is almost always vital, but don't underestimate the power of telling. Stephen King writes incredibly long stories, and if a new writer without connections wrote every detail, not telling but showing everything, it would require a miracle to get published in today's marketplace. There's a balance that you need to find. But when you get to your main characters and the nitty-gritty of characterization, theme, symbolism, foreshadowing, and all those lovely things in a writer's toolbox, you truly need to show the reader. What I'm saying is this: don't cheat the reader. Show when you're foreshadowing or dropping a clue to the killer. Here's another example of telling. It was a hot day. Showing it might look like her shirt stuck to the small of her back and sweat rolled down her thighs as she trudged across the parched grass to the porch where a collie panted in the thin shadow offered by a rocking chair. Notice how much more compelling that is than to say she was hot. These are some of the advantages of showing versus telling. It's more interesting to read. It creates a sharper mental picture. It provides more information. The last showing example lets you know something about what kind of hot weather it was, neither the silken warmth of a tropical beach or the deadly scorch of the desert. So it also helps kind of connect it to the setting. It's convincing. If I say it was a hot day, you'll probably trust me on that. But if I say Lois is a horribly messy person, you might wonder if she's really as bad as I'm claiming. For all you know, I'm a neat freak, and Lois has things in better perspective. With the showing example, you can judge for yourself, and that's what we want to do for our readers, is let them determine what's messy or clean. It's possible to do more than one thing at a time. You can show the reader that the weather is hot at the same time you walk your character up her front yard to her porch and introduce her dog. But if Lois is a mess, can't I just say she's a mess? Sure you can. There are times when you can and when you should. Here's some times when it might be easier or better to tell instead of show. Something that's not important. So with Chekhov's gun, if it's not a clue, it doesn't need to be there. If it's boring, you might show your character falling asleep in biology class, which might be realistic. Please don't subject the reader to the entire biology lecture. It's background information. This is information that you want to communicate efficiently, so don't do a long 5-page info dump of everything we need to know about the background of the character. Or telling just works better. If you want me to know that your character's from Ohio, just say so. It's not necessary to leave Ohio bus tickets lying around his room or have him drop a Go Buckeyes into the conversation. Here's some showing and telling examples. And the first I'm going to demonstrate it, and then I'm going to give you a choice of which prompt that you want to write on. So telling would be, now they were angry. So if you want to see what angry looks like, here's one example. He slammed his water glass down on the table so hard her plate rattled. Still, she refused to look at him, glaring instead of at her napkin, which she was ripping into shreds with her fingernails. That's so much better and compelling than he was angry, because we're also getting a glimpse at her response. And that's very, very compelling when we're looking at characterization. So I'm going to give you a choice of which one you want to follow, which prompt you want to follow for about 5 minutes. Let me tell you what they are first. The first one is, if I tell you it was a cold day, I want you to show me what that looks like. Or, she had a secret crush on her realtor. Show me what that would look like.